Hola clase, hoy nosotros vamos a hablar de la conjugación de los verbos, Verb Conjugation. La meta para este video. I can define the word to conjugate. I can conjugate AR verbs with the use of my notes. Infinitivos, la forma más básica de un verbo. Think back to September when we started talking about verbs. We talked about infinitives, or the most basic form of a verb, and we stated that infinitives can be broken up into three different groups. There are three groups of verbs. We have the AR verbs, como hablar, llamar, practicar, caminar. We have our ER verbs that end in ER, correr, leer, creer. And we have our IR verbs that end in IR, escribir, vivir, mentir. Infinitives are the most basic form of the verb. En inglés, hablar, to speak, llamar, to call, practicar, to practice, caminar, to walk, correr, to run, leer, to read, creer, to believe, escribir, to write, vivir, to live, mentir, to lie. Now notice, as we compare them in Spanish and in English, as we compare our infinitives in Spanish and in English, notice that a subject isn't given. This is simply the action. For example, to speak. We're simply saying to speak. We're not saying who is doing the action. This is because, again, infinitives are the most basic form of the verb. Let's see them in some sentences. En una frase. Me gusta correr. I like to run. No me gusta usar la computadora. I do not like to use the computer. A mi mejor amigo le gusta escribir cuentos. My best friend likes to write stories. Now here we are able to use the infinitive because me gusta already gives us some context. It already tells us who the subject is. Also here, usar la computadora was appropriate. The infinitive was appropriate. That was fine because no me gusta already gives us enough context. Pero clase, yo correr, I to run, to usar la computadora, you to use the computer. If we didn't conjugate our verb, this is how this would sound. This is how the sentence would sound. Can we say yo correr and tú usar? No way, José. Necesitamos conjugar los verbos. We need to conjugate these verbs. To conjugate means to give the different forms of a verb as they vary according to voice, mood, tense, number, and person. We need to change the verb based on who the subject is, based on where the tense is it present tense, future tense, past tense, and based on the mood as well, which is something that you'll learn a little bit later on in Spanish 3 and Spanish 4. For Spanish 1, we're going to concentrate on person. Remember how I said our subject pronouns were going to be very important for conjugating verbs, and this is where they come in. In Spanish, if yo is our subject, we have one form of the verb. If tú is our subject, we have another form of the verb. Usted, él, ella, they have their own form. Nosotros, if we are the subject, we are doing an action. For example, we study. Then we need a separate form of the verb. Ustedes and ellos and ellas again. If one of these is our subject, the verb changes again. Conjugaciones para los grupos de verbos. Let's look at the endings we're going to use for the different groups of verbs. I'm going to show you the endings, and then I'm going to show you how to form a conjugated verb. So the endings for our AR verbs such as bailar, nadar, escuchar, are these. O, as, a, amos, an. If the subject is yo, again, I want to say I do an action. For example, I swim. My verb is going to end in o. If tú is the subject, you do something, the ending will be as. Usted, a, él and ella, a. Nosotros and nosotros, amos. Ustedes, if I want to say you all, do something, an. Ellos and ellas, an. Let's look at our ER verbs. They're a little bit different. Verbs such as correr, comer, y leer will use these endings. So again, if our subject is yo, our verb should end in o. If our subject is tú, our verb should end in es. Usted él, ella, nosotros o nosotras hemos, ustedes en, ellos, ellas en. And IR verbs are almost exactly like ER verbs, except in the nosotros form. So again, if my subject is yo, I do something, o. Tú, es, usted, I want to say you formal, for example. You are very smart. Speaking to a professor or my boss. My verb should end in e. Él or ella, e. Nosotros o nosotras are only difference between ER and IR verbs. Hemos. Ustedes en. Ellos and ellas en. So again, these are the endings we're going to use. Let's look at how to form the conjugated verb. In this chapter, we're only going to concentrate on AR verbs. Later on, we'll learn how to do ER and IR verbs, but for now, we're just going to concentrate on our AR verbs and really learn these endings well. Here they are. Again, o, as, a, amos, and an. If my subject is yo, I do something o, you do something as, usted a, he or she, I want to say he or she does something, él or ella, a. Nosotros and nosotras, we do something. My verb is going to end in amos, ustedes an, ellos, ellas an. Now guys, notice, usted and él, ella use the same ending, a. And then same over here, ustedes and ellos, ellas use an. Now I know that ustedes means you all, and ellos and ellas means they. So it's the difference between second and third person. But, so we only have to memorize less endings. We're going to just combine usted, él, and ella, and ustedes, ellos, and ellas into the same little category on our chart. So this is how our chart is going to look from now on. Notice I've dropped the usted down here because it also uses the ending. I've dropped ustedes down because again it also uses the an ending. Okay? So our AR verb endings are o, as, a, amos, an. O, as, a, amos, an. Notice we've taken out the vosotros from our chart because like I explained in class, that's really only used in Spain, and so we're not going to use it in this class. Para formar. So in order to form our conjugations, in order to form a conjugated verb, what you need to do is drop the AR, ER, or IR ending. Take it off. And then you're going to add the endings that I just showed you, depending on who the subject is. Okay, so let's do this with bailar. I dropped my AR, ER, IR ending. In this case, my AR ending. I took that off. And now I'm going to add the different endings from my AR verb endings. So in the yo form, I have bailó. In the tú form, my ending was as, so I have bailas. Él, baila. Nosotros bailamos. Ellos bailan. So notice, I took what I had up here after I dropped the AR, and I just added the endings that we talked about. O, as, a, amos, and an. Bailó, I dance. Tú bailas, you dance. Él baila, he dances. Nosotros bailamos, we dance. Ellos bailan, they dance. We're going to organize verbs in this chart often in class. It helps us keep things organized and it helps us visualize the verbs. So in this chart, yo's up here, bailó is our form. Yo bailo, again, I dance. Tú, the form is bailas, again, you dance. I dance. I dance, yo bailo. Tú bailas, you dance. Él, ella, usted, he or she dances, or remember it can also mean you formal dances. Nosotros and nosotras bailamos, we dance. Ellos, ellas, ustedes, they dance. Or ustedes, you all dance. A ti te toca, your turn. Let's conjugate the verb hablar. Remember your steps. Drop the AR ending. And then add the ending that corresponds to your subject. Go ahead and conjugate this verb, just like we did, in a little chart like I showed you on the previous slide. Does your chart look like this? Hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, hablan? If it did, excelente. Otra vez. Hay que conjugar el verbo usar. Okay, so write your chart in the different forms of usar. Pause the video now while you complete this. Does your verb look like this? Your verb chart look like this? Uso, usas, usa, usamos, usan. Y un más. One more. Practicar. Draw a verb chart for the verb practicar. Pause the video so you can complete this. Practico, I practice. Practicas, you practice. Practica, he or she practices. Or it can mean you practice if you're speaking to someone formally. Practicamos, we practice. Ellos and ellas, they practice. And ustedes, you all practice. Para usar los verbos en una frase, los conjugamos según el sujeto. So, when we are using these verbs in a sentence, we conjugate them according to the subject. Let's practice. Yo practico deportes. Yo is my subject. I am playing sports. And so I want to conjugate my verb practicar for the yo form. Yo practico deportes. I play sports. Tú practicas deportes. Tú is my subject. So that's why I've used the to form, the verb with the as ending. Él practica deportes. He plays sports. Ella practica deportes. She plays sports. Usted practica deportes. You play sports, if you're speaking formally. Juan practica deportes. Juan plays sports. Juana practica deportes. Juana plays sports. Nosotros practicamos deportes. We play sports. Nosotras practicamos deportes. We play sports if we're all girls. Mis amigos y yo practicamos deportes. My friends and I play sports. Remember, you can think of mis amigos y yo again as we or nosotros. So that's why we're using this ending. It still fits into that category on our chart. Pablo y yo. Again, Pablo y yo, or in other words, we practicamos deportes. Pablo y yo would still be a nosotros form. Ellos practican deportes. They play sports. Ellas practican deportes. They play sports. They're all girls. Pablo y Fernando practican deportes. Elena y Beatriz practican deportes. And ustedes practican deportes. You all play sports. One more. Tú y tus amigos practican deportes. You and your friends play sports. Again, tú y tus amigos, remember like we practiced in class, tú y tus amigos is kind of like saying you guys. So the ustedes form or practican. A ti te toca, your turn. Pause the video now so that you can complete the sentence. Remember to look at your subject to decide what form of the verb you're going to use, meaning what ending you're going to put on these verbs so that it matches the subject. Go ahead and pause the video so you can complete this task. All right, chicos, las respuestas. Did you have yo escucho música? I listen to music. Ellos hablan por teléfono. They talk on the phone. Nosotros pasamos tiempo. We spend time. ¿Montas tú en bicicleta? Do you ride a bike? Now notice here, our subject too came after the verb, after the verb. In Spanish, that's possible. The subject can come after the verb. Usted habla español. Ustedes bailan bien. Lorena y yo hablamos en la clase. Tú y tu familia esquían. You and your family ski. Yo no practico deportes. I don't play sports. Barbara y Luisa estudian mucho. Barbara and Luisa study a lot. El profesor Garza enseña la clase de ciencias naturales. Professor Garza teaches a science class. Check your answers here. If you did something wrong, try and figure out what it is or circle it so that you can ask me in class tomorrow. All right, chicos, la sección de practicar. Pause your video now and go ahead and copy these sentences with the correct form of the verb into your notes. Again, remember to look at your subject to decide which form of the verb you need to use. Pause the video now so you can complete this. Gracias. Por favor, tú necesitas escribir preguntas que tienes. Please write down any questions that you have had during the video so that you can ask me tomorrow. Adiós.